you don't know me, and I think there's a few people who are new since I've been up here last. My name's Jeremiah. I'm on the teaching team here. And I'm going to be teaching about silence. So there's a lot of jokes that you can make about that. So I could just stand up here for 30 minutes and not say anything. Some of you were down nervous. That's great. No, I'm not going to do that. Just a reminder, there's Connect cards in the back of the pew in front of you. If you'd like to fill those out so that we can get connected. If you're new, if you've been here a dozen times or more, feel free to fill out the prayer on the back and submit that to the gold bowl in the back. We love to pray as a community, care for the people around us. Yeah. So for past several weeks, we've been going through spiritual disciplines, and you might have noticed that they're very interconnected. A lot of people might have this misconception about spiritual disciplines, that they're this list of check boxes that you go through and you check them off. But in reality, they're this big ball of wibbly wobbly spirituality stuff.
I will have things.
Yeah, some of you got that reference. But yeah, they're all so interconnected. It's hard to do one without it feeding into another. It's hard to pray without that leading into meditation, or meditate without that leading to prayer. Study fuels both of those. It's hard to do simplicity without submitting. It's hard to serve without submitting. And then simplicity feeds into silence and solitude, like we'll talk about today. And so all these are tied together, and they're not check boxes that decide whether you're a good Christian or not. They're not a measure of your faith. They are practices that encourage internal changes. They are opportunities to sit before God and allow Him to change you. And so today we're going to be talking about silence and solitude. And these are two disciplines that are so interconnected that they're kind of the same thing. So I want to clarify to start with that when we talk about solitude and silence, we aren't talking about becoming a monk in a monastery. We aren't talking about going into the mountains and ignoring society and being off on your own. And we're not talking about taking a vow of silence and not speaking for however long or forever. If you feel called to do one of those things, that's fine. These are good practices in order to instill silence and solitude. But I'm not expecting anyone here to do that. We're not going to announce the Garden Church Mountain Solitude Retreat today. That's not happening. Well, apparently Dustin wants it, and he can actually change that. But no, what I'm going to encourage today is that you start this practice of silence and solitude, where just each day you take a few minutes to get away from everything and everyone, and to be with God, to encounter Him and remember His glory. And the result of a practice like that is an internal state of silence and solitude, one that you take with you anywhere you go. An internal state that you can take into a crowd, that you can take into noise, that you can take into chaos, and it's still with you. It's an internal state of calm. It's discernment that helps you know when to speak and when to not speak. So that's what I'm talking about today when I talk about silence and solitude. And there's two problems in the world. Look, there's many problems in the world, but we're going to talk about two of them, but two that I think silence and solitude help solve. So the first problem is that the world is full of noise and lies. Back in the 13 and 1400s, there was a saint called Thomas à Kempis who wrote Spiritual Disciplines, and he talked about how the world was so noisy that And then you move to the 1970s, and Richard Foster writes his book, The Celebration of Disciplines, that we've been going through. And in his chapter on silence and solitude, he talks about, the telephone is so noisy, you need to unplug it and get away from it. And now we have today, where we walk around with computers in our pockets, where we can't escape the noise. There's the book, The Anxious Generation, and it talks about how this has affected us and caused so much mental illness, anxiety, depression, all these problems. And so this world is full of noise, and if we listen to the noise, we'll become filled with fear, and that will lead to anger and hatred. We'll hear that there isn't enough, that things are always scarce. We'll hear that others want power and want to abuse us and misuse us. We'll hear that the world is falling to pieces and there's no hope. And sometimes some of those things may be true. Some people might want power over you. Some people might want to hurt you and abuse you. But the noise drowns out the hope that God gives us. The noise leaves no room for nuance and complexity. It leaves no chance for change. It leaves you no choices. And so when we listen to this noise, everything becomes binary, it becomes black and white, it becomes us versus them. And so then we become filled with this fear, and we respond with anger and with hatred towards each other. And so that's the first problem. The world is full of noise and lies. The second problem is that we're terrible at listening to each other. We are awful at it. We suck at it. As a society, we just can't seem to listen to each other. We constantly want to argue, or we constantly want to come back with a response to what somebody said that builds up us and our point. As a church, we're not much different. As the global church, not listening has caused divisions, has caused schisms, has caused new denominations and church splits all over the place for centuries. As a local church, we struggle with this too. I'm not going to call anyone out specifically, but it's true. And I think we know this. We struggle with silence. We struggle with listening to each other. If you've been to any of our life groups, then you know about our guidelines. Our small group guidelines, these are meant to foster a community that can be vulnerable with each other. A community that can care about each other and listen to each other, and among other things. But if you look at them, almost all of them, in one way or another, tie into this spiritual discipline of silence, tie into being able to discern when to speak and when not to speak. Start off with the fact that it's supposed to be a confidential space. You're not supposed to talk about things outside of it. You're supposed to have that practice of silence and know, I shouldn't talk about these things that people share in confidence. Use I statements controls what it is that how you're phrasing things and thinking about how you're saying things, so that you're focused on you and how you need to grow rather than on other people and how they're wrong. Use humor responsibly, as you hold back the joke when somebody shares something important. You keep silence when you really want to laugh. No crosstalk. You're silencing the conversation that you want to have on the side. You're silencing the thought that you want to have on the side so that you can listen to the person who is actually sharing. Don't rescue, don't fix. You're not trying to impose your will and your voice onto somebody else's life. You're letting God speak to them instead. Listen to understand about listening. It's about silencing your own opinions and your own thoughts so that you can truly see that other person's perspective and understand and love them. Pause is literally leaving room for silence. It's being silent so that other people have the chance to speak. Don't soapbox is about silencing your own rants, your own opinions, your own thoughts, so that you're not drowning out somebody else's thoughts. And all of that builds up into fighting for relationships, where you're caring about and loving a person by, in part, keeping silent when you need to. And so we are terrible at listening to each other. And we need silence so that we're able to do that. And so by the practice of silence and solitude, we can. So we're going to be looking at a few examples in the Bible of silence and solitude and what it can do and how we can fail at it. And we're going to build up to the transfigurations, but first we're going to start with Moses in Exodus 34, verses 29 through 35. So I'll read that. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him. And Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord has spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. And Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went in to speak with him. So some background to this. We start off the book of Exodus with the Exodus, where God comes and rescues Israel from slavery, and he takes them out of Egypt, and they're in the wilderness in a desolate place with God, alone with him. And so the entire people of Israel are practicing solitude with God. And then you get to Mount Sinai, and Moses goes up alone because the people are too scared to encounter God. And so Moses is now practicing solitude with God all by himself. And he's listening to him. He's listening to hear God speak. And just earlier in this chapter, you have where Moses intercedes for the people of Israel, and he gets to see God. He gets to hear who God is. He gets to know God's character. And as a result, he comes down and he is completely different. He's drastically changed to the point where the rest of Israel is scared to look at him. His face is literally shining because he was in God's presence. And he listened to God, and now that encounter radiates off of him. And it's so shocking to the people of Israel that they ask him to cover his face. That's what silence can do to a person. It's not likely that your face will shine. Probably. But when you sit in silence before God and you listen to him, you hear his truth rather than the noise of this world. You see his glory, and you leave that time changed. You come back to the world, and you are drastically different. That time, the presence that you sat in, it'll radiate off of you. And people can't help but see the incredible God that you are with. And Moses spent this time listening to God and learning about God and knowing God's character, and he comes back and has all these amazing things to tell the people, the whole Torah, which is all about loving the people around you, about establishing a society that listens to the vulnerable and the weak and cares for them. And so he comes back from that encounter loving the people, even though they are constantly messing up. He loves them just as God does, and he's willing to show them mercy and grace. So that's what silence can do. That's what can happen when you spend time in solitude with God, just listening to him rather than your own thoughts, your own worries, your own cares, your own fears, rather than the lies of this world. So this is an example of what happens when you spend time in solitude and you actually listen to God. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you try to spend time in solitude, but you're just constantly listening to your own noise, constantly listening to your own fears, and you can't help to hear God? Well, we have an example of that too. In 1 Kings chapter 19, we get to see Elijah. It says this: "There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He said, 'I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, only I, am left. And they seek my life to take it away.' And he said, 'Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low silence. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He said, 'I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant and thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, only I, am left. And they seek my life to take it away.' The Lord said to him, 'Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him.'" So to give you some background on this passage, at this point in the story of Israel, they're in a very bad spot. There's been a division between the north and the south kingdoms of Israel. The northern kingdom, which Elijah comes from, is completely forgotten God. They're practicing idolatry, they're burning his altars, they're killing his prophets, and Jezebel is currently the queen, and she is supporting all of this destruction of God in his name. And so Elijah is scared. He's been threatened by Jezebel, and so he runs into the wilderness to see God. And what's interesting about Elijah's story is there's actually a lot of connections between Elijah's story and the Exodus story that you're supposed to pick up on. So he, just before this, has this big fight between him and the prophets of Baal, and he wins. And so he's delivering Israel from all this idolatry, all this evil. And then he flees into the wilderness, into a desert, where God provides for him, just like he did for Israel when they were in the desert. And then he comes to Mount Sinai, just like Moses did. And he goes up and he encounters God, just as Moses did. And then he's told, yeah, here's who the next generation is going to be. Just like when Israel failed and they didn't come into the promised land, God said, yes, the next generation, they will be the ones to take over from here. They will be the ones to get my promise. And then my personal favorite connection is just like Moses had his successor, who was Joshua. Joshua's name means he who saves. Elijah here gets his successor, and his name is Elisha, which means God saves. It's the same route. It's the same word in Hebrew. And then you get the rest of Elijah's story. He goes, there's a crossing of the Jordan, just like you had at the beginning of Joshua. You have he's called up into heaven and is mysteriously disappears as instead of having a body dying, just like what happened with Moses, who went up a mountain and mysteriously disappears. And so you have all these parallels, and right here is supposed to be a retelling of Moses going up and encountering God and interceding for Israel. But it's flipped. Moses went on the mountain and he interceded for Israel. And twice he goes before God and says, have mercy on your people, don't destroy them. Have mercy on your people, you love them, don't destroy them. But here, Elijah goes before God. I'm with fear. And he says, there's no hope. I'm the only one left. There is no hope for Israel. You get this kind of implied, destroy them. It's over. Give up on them. But Elijah wasn't listening. He wasn't paying attention to what God was saying, to who God was. Because before this, Elijah prays to God, and there's a drought for 7 years in Israel. And then he prays to God again, and that ends. He goes and he confronts the prophets of Baal, and God brings fire down from heaven and consumes a sacrifice in an instant. He comes out into the wilderness, and God provides for him in this desolate place, sustaining him. He goes onto the mountain, and he encounters God, and before God even shows up, you see his power in the winds that can rip up mountains, in an earthquake that can shake the very foundations of what he's standing on, in a fire that can consume everything. And what's Elijah's response to this? There's no hope. He wasn't listening. He wasn't paying attention to the glory and the power of God. He was listening to the noise and the lies of this world that says there's no hope. Didn't understand that God answered him and said, as long as I'm here, as long as I still love my people, there is hope for them. Elijah isn't alone. You see that at the very end. He says, there's still 7,000 of my people in Israel. I haven't given up on them. There will be a next generation. I haven't given up on my people. Without an internal state of silence, without quieting our own voices and the noise of this world, we can go into the presence of God. We can see his glory and all of that and still leave unchanged. We can still leave believing that there's no hope for God's people, that there's no hope for this world that he's put us in. But that's not true. Without internal silence, we can't listen to God. So that's Elijah's example. That's his failure right there. But now we'll move on to our last example with the transfiguration, Matthew 17. So I'll read through this one and explain it as I go. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. So you get some important setting points in this first verse. First thing is that it's after 6 days. So it's on the seventh day. It's supposed to be the Sabbath, the time when people are supposed to come before God and worship him and be with him and be at peace with him. And then in addition to that, they're going up a high mountain by themselves. So they're practicing solitude, and they're going up a mountain just like Moses did, just like Elijah did. And what happens when they go up this mountain? Well, in verse 2, and he, Jesus, transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes appeared white as light. And so Jesus' face begins to shine just like Moses's was. But then it goes further than that, and his entire being begins to shine. And so you realize this is what Moses was reflecting when he came down from Sinai. This is the glory of God there, just beginning to see it. And in case you didn't make the connection to Moses and Elijah, you get in verse 3. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Oh, I think we're supposed to be making some connections there. And so then you get verse 4. And Peter. Oh, Peter. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. I love that in Luke's retelling of this, he adds in there that Peter didn't know what he was saying. He was nervous. He was freaking out because he didn't know what was going on. So he just starts babbling. And I mean, I can make fun of him and poke fun at Peter all day long, but it happens to us too. We go and we see something amazing, we see something incredible and life-changing, and we don't know how to respond, so we just start talking. But what Peter says is interesting. He wants to build tents there. And I know a lot of pastors will point out, it's like, he wants to build tents, he wants to stay up there when they're supposed to go back down to the people, and that's true. But the more important thing there is he wants to contain the glory that he's seeing. Good. He wants to make it something manageable, something that he can understand. Because seeing the glory of God is something terrifying. You get in the Exodus, God commands the building of his tabernacle, which is a tent that he's supposed to dwell in. But it's according to his design. It's supposed to reflect heaven. And God is the one who chooses to dwell in that tent so that he can be with his people. His glory resides in there so that he can be with his people. And he makes that choice. It's not humans who make that choice. He wants to be with his people in that way. Humans aren't containing him to one spot. God sets his own limits, not us. And so Peter wants to contain this glory that he's encountering, but then you get the next verse. And Peter was still babbling on. When behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. So Peter is terrified and freaking out and wants to try and contain this glory, and then suddenly you get this cloud. And if you're making connections to Moses and Elijah, then you realize this is what was called the glory cloud. It rested on Mount Sinai when God was there, and the entire mountain burst into flames. It entered the tabernacle when they had finished building it, and nobody could go in because of the power that was there. It entered the temple when they finished building that one, and nobody could go in because of the power that was there. It is a sign of God's power and his presence, and now it is resting on this mountain where the disciples are. And so any ideas of, oh, maybe we can contain this glory, this great power, this crazy things that's happening, all those ideas are gone. You can't contain this. This is far too much for you. And so God's presence is now there completely and fully, and all his power. And he says, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. All the things that God could have commanded these people, and he says, listen to my Son. Listen to him. He asks us to practice silence and to listen. So the disciples are terrified. They fall on their faces. But Jesus came and touched them and saying, Rise and have no fear. When they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. All the power and glory of God contained in one person makes it possible for us to encounter God. We can practice silence and solitude because Jesus made a way for us to do it. In that practice, silence and solitude forces us to encounter the glory of God.
Right.
Forces us to get away from the noise of the world so that we can listen to God and his truths, so that we can see his power, his glory, we can understand his love, his mercy, his justice, his righteousness, his holiness. We can see who God is. So then when we practice solitude and silence, we develop an internal state of solitude and silence. We become a person who can listen to those around us. We begin to love as God does. We have peace in the world of noise and chaos because we know the truth of who God is. So that's why we practice solitude and silence. That's why I want to encourage you to go out from this place and go through your week and just find a few minutes each day to find silence, to practice silence.